What if the biggest reason your life has not changed is because you are still being the same person who created your current reality? Think about that for a moment. Every morning, you wake up with the same memories, the same identity, the same beliefs about yourself, the same internal conversations, and without realizing it, you carry yesterday's version of yourself into today. But what if you could interrupt that pattern? What if for 30 days you completely changed the way you saw yourself? Not by pretending, not by ignoring reality, not by forcing positive thoughts, but by stepping into the identity of the person you truly want to become. This is the idea that changed the way thousands of people understand manifestation. A teaching from one of the most controversial and fascinating teachers of consciousness, Neville Goddard. Neville spent decades teaching a simple but powerful principle. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. At first glance, it sounds almost too simple. Imagine what you want. Feel as if it is already yours. Persist in that assumption. But behind those words is a much deeper idea. Your reality is not only shaped by what happens around you, it is shaped by who you believe yourself to be. And today, we are putting this idea to the ultimate test. For 30 days, one experiment, one question. Can changing your inner identity actually change the way you experience life? For most people, the desire for change starts with frustration. They look at their life and think, I want something different. I want more success. I want more freedom. I want better relationships. I want to become someone greater. But the problem is, most people try to create a new life while still thinking from the old version of themselves. They want a different future, but they continue carrying the same emotional patterns from the past. They want confidence, but they constantly tell themselves they are not enough. They want abundance, but their inner conversation is built around fear and limitation. They want love, but deep down they assume they are difficult to love. Neville Goddard believed this was the hidden reason many people remained stuck, not because they lacked desire, not because they lacked effort, but because their imagination was creating one reality, while their identity was creating another. The first step of this experiment was understanding one important question. Who am I assuming myself to be? Because, according to Neville, your assumption about yourself is the foundation of your experience. An assumption is not just a random thought. A thought comes and goes. An assumption is something you accept as true, something that feels natural, something that becomes part of your identity. For example, someone may think, I want to become successful. But another person thinks, I am someone who naturally creates success. These two people may have the same goal, but they are operating from completely different identities. The first person is trying to reach something outside themselves. The second person is living from a state where that reality already feels possible. Neville called this living in the end. But before starting the experiment, there was one misunderstanding that needed to be removed. The law of assumption is not about pretending. It is not about looking at a difficult situation and saying, everything is perfect. It is not about denying challenges. It is not about escaping reality. The deeper idea is this. Your current circumstances are a reflection of previous assumptions. Your past thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and expectations created the state you are experiencing now. And if the old state created your current experience, then a new state can create a new experience. The person you become internally determines the way you move through life externally. The first day of the experiment began with something simple, observation. Before changing anything, the goal was to notice the invisible patterns running in the background. because most people do not realize how often they repeat the same story. I am always unlucky. Nothing works for me. I never get opportunities. People always disappoint me. These sentences may seem harmless, but repeated often enough, they become instructions, they become expectations, they become assumptions, and assumptions quietly influence the choices you make, the opportunities you notice, the risks you take, the way you communicate, the way you see yourself. One of Neville Goddard's most important teachings was about inner conversations, the conversations nobody hears, the conversations that happen inside your mind when you are alone. Neville believed these conversations were incredibly powerful because they reveal your true state. You may tell the world, I believe everything is possible. But what do you say to yourself when things go wrong? That is where the real assumption lives. Because your deepest beliefs are not always found in your public words, they are found in your private thoughts. So the experiment introduced a new question. Would the person I want to become speak to themselves this way? If the answer was no, the conversation had to change, not through force, not through pretending, but through choosing a new identity. Every night before sleep, the experiment included one of Neville's most famous techniques, the state akin to sleep, known as SATs. Neville taught that the moments before sleep are powerful because the conscious mind becomes quieter. In that relaxed state, imagination becomes more vivid. The practice was simple. Instead of imagining problems, imagine the fulfilled outcome. Instead of replaying disappointment, create a new inner experience. Imagine receiving the news you want. Imagine having the conversation you desire. Imagine feeling the emotions of the person who already has what they wanted. The goal was not to force the future. The goal was to become familiar with it. Because what feels natural internally eventually influences how you move externally. After several days, something unexpected happened. The first changes were not external. Nothing dramatic appeared overnight. No magical event, no instant transformation. Instead, the change happened internally. The person began noticing something different, a calmer reaction, a different perspective, a stronger sense of self. The same situations appeared, but the response changed, and that revealed something important. Sometimes the first sign of transformation is not that your world changes, it is that you change the way you experience your world. But then something happened that almost everyone experiences when they try to change themselves. The old identity started fighting back, because changing your circumstances is one thing, but changing the person you believe yourself to be is a completely different battle. For years, your mind has collected evidence about who you are. Every success, every failure, every rejection, every disappointment, every compliment, every criticism. All of these moments become part of a story you eventually start calling my reality. But Neville Goddard taught that what you call reality is often a reflection of the state you have repeatedly accepted. And when you attempt to leave an old state, the mind naturally tries to pull you back. Think about this. A person can be unhappy with their life, but still feel uncomfortable imagining something completely different. Why? Because the unknown feels dangerous. The human mind is designed to protect what is familiar. Even if the familiar state creates frustration, it still feels safe because it is known. This is why many people say, I want change. But when change begins, they unconsciously return to old patterns. They return to old thoughts, old reactions, old assumptions. Not because they want to suffer, but because they are returning to the identity they know. Around the first week of the experiment, the biggest challenge appeared. The outside world had not changed yet. The same responsibilities existed, The same circumstances existed. The same challenges existed. And this created the most dangerous moment, the temptation to give up, because this is where most people stop. They say, I tried, I imagined, uh, I believed, but nothing happened. But Neville explained that this reaction comes from looking at the old reality and allowing it to determine the new state. You cannot create a new future while constantly asking the past for permission. Neville often spoke about persistence, but many people misunderstand what persistence means. They think persistence means trying harder, forcing more, repeating affirmations all day, constantly checking for results. But that is not persistence, that is struggle. True persistence is something much calmer. It is returning to the chosen state again and again. It is deciding, this is who I am now. Even when circumstances appear different, a person who assumes they are successful does not spend every moment proving they are successful. A person who assumes they are loved does not constantly search for proof of love. The inner state comes first. One of Neville Goddard's most fascinating concepts was the bridge of incidents. The idea is simple. Once you change your assumption, life begins moving you toward that state through a series of events. But those events do not always appear the way you expect. Sometimes the bridge looks like a new opportunity, a conversation, a realization, a decision, a person entering your life, a habit changing, a door closing, a new direction appearing. The mistake people make is judging the process too early. They expect the bridge to look obvious. They expect immediate proof. But often the transformation begins invisibly before it becomes visible. By the second week, another challenge appeared. The mind started asking, what if this does not work? This question is where many people become trapped, because doubt itself is not the problem. Having a doubtful thought is normal. The problem begins when you accept doubt as your identity. A thought can pass through your mind, but you decide which thoughts receive your attention. Neville taught that imagination is controlled by attention. Whatever you consistently give emotional energy to becomes stronger. This was the biggest realization of the experiment. At the beginning, the focus was, how do I get what I want? But slowly, the question changed. Instead of, how do I attract this? The question became, who would I be if this were already true? This is the foundation of Neville's teaching. The difference between wanting something and becoming the version of yourself who naturally experiences it. Imagine two people who want financial freedom. Person A wakes up every morning thinking, I need money. I don't have enough. When will things improve? Their entire identity is built around waiting. Person B chooses a different state. They think, I am someone who creates value. I am someone who finds opportunities. I am someone who handles success wisely. Both people may have the same desire, but they are operating from completely different assumptions. The experiment revealed something important. Manifestation is not really about getting something outside yourself. It is about changing the relationship you have with yourself. Because everything you experience passes through your consciousness. Your beliefs influence your actions. Your emotions influence your choices. Your assumptions influence your expectations. And your expectations influence the way you interact with life. Then came the unexpected turning point. Around day 21, something subtle began happening. The practice stopped feeling like a practice. The new thoughts started feeling natural. The new identity started feeling familiar. The person was no longer trying to convince themselves. They were simply experiencing a different inner state. And this is where Neville's teaching becomes powerful, because the goal is not to constantly force yourself to believe. The goal is to reach a point where the assumption feels normal, where the thought, I am already becoming this person, does not feel like imagination anymore. It feels like truth. After 21 days, one thing became clear. The biggest obstacle was never the outside world. The biggest obstacle was the old identity trying to survive. The old version of yourself says, stay the same. Do not change. Return to what you know. But every transformation requires leaving something behind. A new reality requires a new state. A new state requires a new identity. And a new identity begins with one decision. Who do you choose to be now? But the final days of the experiment revealed something even deeper. Because changing your thoughts is one thing, but changing your emotional relationship with your reality is where the true power of Neville Goddard's teaching appears. The question was no longer, will my reality change? The real question became, have I changed enough to receive it? And what happened next was the most unexpected part of the entire experiment. The hardest part of changing your life is not creating a new vision. It is letting go of the person who created your old one. Because when you decide to become someone new, something unexpected happens. Your old identity starts fighting for survival. The old thoughts return. The old fears appear. The old circumstances seem louder than ever. And this is the moment where most people make the biggest mistake. They assume nothing is working. My old reality is still here. Maybe this is impossible. But what if the opposite was true? What if the resistance you feel is not proof that you are failing? What if it is proof that you are finally changing? For most of our lives, we operate from a hidden program, a collection of beliefs we rarely question. Beliefs about who we are, what we deserve, what is possible for us, what kind of life we can experience. These beliefs operate quietly in the background. They influence our choices, they influence our emotions, they influence what we notice and what we ignore. Neville Goddard called this inner state the state of consciousness. According to Neville, every person is always occupying a state, and that state is constantly expressing itself. The person who lives in a state of fear will naturally interpret life through fear. The person who lives in a state of confidence will naturally see opportunities others miss. The outside world is not the only thing shaping your experience. Your inner world is constantly participating. One of the biggest discoveries during the experiment was this. Your conscious mind may want change, but your subconscious mind wants familiarity. You may consciously say, I want success. But deep down, if your identity says, success is difficult, people like me don't achieve that, or I always struggle, then your actions and emotions will continue returning to that old identity. This is why many people experience the same patterns repeatedly, different situations, different people, different years, but the same emotional experience, because the outer details changed, but the inner state remained the same. During the experiment, there were moments where the old identity appeared. A negative thought would come. This is not realistic. Nothing has changed. Why are you doing this? And this created a choice. Return to the old state or remain faithful to the new one. This is the battle Neville described. Not a battle against the world, a battle between two versions of yourself. the person you have been and the person you are becoming. Many people think manifestation fails because they do not want something strongly enough. But Neville taught something different. The problem is often not desire. The problem is identification. You can desire wealth, but identify with lack. You can desire love, but identify with rejection. You can desire freedom, but identify with limitation. The question is not, what do I want? The deeper question is, who am I being while wanting it? Because your desire follows your identity. Neville Goddard repeatedly emphasized the importance of self-concept. Your self-concept is the image you hold of yourself. It is the answer to, who am I? Not the answer you give people, the answer you feel privately. Someone with a powerful self-concept does not need constant external validation. They naturally move differently. They make different decisions. They expect different outcomes, not because they are better than others, but because their inner assumption is different. Around the middle of the experiment, something interesting happened. The focus shifted. At first, the goal was, how can I make my dream happen? But slowly, that question disappeared. It became, how would the future version of me think today? This changed everything, because instead of chasing a result, the experiment became about identity. A successful person thinks differently before success appears. A confident person thinks differently before confidence becomes visible. A fulfilled person feels differently before the evidence arrives. But then came the biggest test. A difficult situation appeared, something that normally would have triggered an old reaction. The old pattern wanted to return. Stress, fear, overthinking, doubt. But this time, something different happened. There was a pause, a moment of awareness. A question appeared. Is this how the person I want to become would respond? Yeah. That one question created space between the old reaction and the new identity. And that space is where transformation begins. One of Neville Goddard's most powerful techniques is called revision. The idea is simple. Instead of allowing a negative experience to define you, you mentally revisit it and imagine it differently. Why? Because the emotional meaning you attach to an event shapes your state. A painful memory can become a prison, or it can become a lesson. Revision is not about denying the past, it is about changing the emotional relationship with it, because the past only controls you when you continue carrying it into the present. By the third week, the experiment revealed something surprising. The biggest change was not that everything outside suddenly became perfect. The biggest change was internal. Less reacting, more awareness, more control over attention, more trust in the chosen state. The person realized they had been waiting for life to prove they had changed. But the entire teaching was about changing first. Neville called the movement from imagination into experience, the bridge of incidents. When you adopt a new assumption, life does not always change instantly. Instead, events begin unfolding. A conversation happens, a new idea appears, a decision is made, a door closes, another opens. At first, these events may seem random, but looking back, they often connect. The path becomes visible after you walk it. The greatest lesson from this part of the experiment was this. Your old reality is not your enemy. It is simply the reflection of a previous version of you. You do not need to fight it. You do not need to fear it. You simply need to stop identifying with it. Because the moment you stop giving your old story power, you create space for a new one. But then came the hardest question. What happens when you have changed internally, but the outside world has not caught up yet? Can you remain faithful when there is no evidence? Can you trust the unseen before the visible appears? This is where the true test of the law of assumption begins. There is a moment in every transformation when nothing seems to be happening. You have changed your thoughts. You have changed your focus. You have started seeing yourself differently. But when you look around, your circumstances still look exactly the same. And this is the moment where most people quit. They say, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my old reality is stronger than my new assumption. But Neville Goddard taught something that completely challenges this way of thinking. He said, the world you see is not the cause, it is the reflection. The mistake is allowing yesterday's reflection to determine today's state, because before a new reality appears physically, it must first become real internally, and this is where the true test begins. One of the biggest obstacles in manifestation is the constant search for evidence. People say, when I see results, then I will believe. When my circumstances change, then I will feel confident. When someone treats me differently, then I will believe I am valued. But Neville taught that this puts the power backwards. You are allowing the external world to control your internal state. You are saying, my reality determines who I am. But Neville's teaching was the opposite. Who you assume yourself to be influences the reality you experience. The inner state comes first, the physical evidence comes later. During the experiment, this became the most difficult challenge. The desire was still there, the vision was still there, but the temptation appeared. Maybe I should check if it is working. Maybe I should look for a sign. Maybe I need to do more. And this is where many people unknowingly move from faith into fear, because underneath the question, when will it happen, is often the assumption, it has not happened yet. And whatever state you repeatedly occupy, you continue experiencing. This revealed one of Neville Goddard's deepest lessons. There is a difference between faith and force. Force says, I need to make this happen. I need to control every detail. I need to chase every opportunity. I need proof immediately. Faith says, I have accepted this internally. I trust the state I have chosen. I do not need to panic. Faith is not passive. It does not mean doing nothing. It means your actions come from confidence instead of desperation. Many people begin manifestation with excitement, but slowly excitement can become obsession. They constantly repeat affirmations because they are afraid. They visualize because they are worried. They search for signs because they doubt. The practice that was supposed to create peace becomes another source of anxiety. Neville warned against this state because obsession reveals the assumption, I don't have it. The person who already feels fulfilled does not constantly chase confirmation. They live from acceptance. The biggest turning point of the experiment happened when the focus changed. Instead of asking, how do I get my desire? The question became, how would I feel if I already knew it was done? This is the heart of Neville's teaching, the fulfilled state. Imagine a person who already achieved their goal. How would they think? How would they walk? How would they handle challenges? How would they speak to themselves? The goal is not to escape the present. The goal is to bring the consciousness of your desired future into your present moment. One of the most powerful discoveries was noticing inner conversations. Most people underestimate how much they talk to themselves. Before a meeting, what if I fail? Before a conversation, they probably don't care. Before a new opportunity, I'm probably not ready. These invisible conversations create emotional states, and emotional states influence behavior. Neville taught that changing these conversations changes the direction of consciousness. Instead of, I hope they accept me, the new assumption becomes, I am naturally valued. Instead of, I hope something good happens. The new assumption becomes, good things are natural for me. The last week of the experiment became the most interesting because something subtle started happening. The person stopped thinking about the technique constantly. At the beginning, they were trying to believe, they were trying to feel, they were trying to become, but eventually, the new identity started feeling normal. And this is the point Neville was talking about. The assumption becomes powerful when it stops feeling like an effort, when it becomes natural. At this point, an important realization appeared. Maybe manifestation was never really about getting things. Maybe the deeper purpose was discovering yourself, because every desire points toward a version of yourself. You don't only want money, you want freedom. You don't only want love, you want connection. You don't only want success, you want to experience your own potential. The external desire is often a symbol of an internal transformation waiting to happen. After nearly 30 days, one truth became clear. The person was not becoming someone new. They were removing the beliefs that prevented them from expressing who they already wanted to be. Neville did not teach people to create from nothing. He taught people to awaken to the creative power already within them, the power of imagination, the power of awareness, the power of assumption. But the final days revealed the most important question of the entire experiment. After changing the inner world, after releasing old beliefs, after living from the end, what actually changed? Did reality finally reflect the new state, or was the greatest transformation happening somewhere else? Because the final discovery was not about attracting a new life. It was about becoming the person who was ready to experience it. After 30 days of testing Neville Goddard's law of assumption, one question remained. Did reality actually change? Did circumstances suddenly rearrange? Did everything become perfect overnight? The answer was not what most people would expect, because the biggest transformation was not something that happened outside. It was something that happened within. And this revealed the deepest message behind Neville Goddard's teachings. You do not change your life by chasing a different world. You change your life by becoming a different version of yourself. During the final days, something interesting happened. The person stopped waking up and immediately asking, when will it happen? That question slowly disappeared. Instead, a new awareness appeared. Who am I choosing to be today? This was the turning point, because the focus moved away from waiting and moved toward being. The person was no longer trying to convince themselves that change was possible. They were starting to live from the assumption that change was natural. At the beginning of the experiment, the goal seemed simple. Get the desired result, manifest the goal, create the outcome. But after 30 days, the understanding changed. The goal was never just the result. The goal was the transformation of identity, because every desire carries a deeper message. A person who desires success is often seeking confidence. A person who desires wealth is often seeking freedom. A person who desires love is often seeking connection and acceptance. The external desire is only the surface. The deeper desire is becoming the person who feels complete. Neville Goddard's teachings were built around one revolutionary idea. Consciousness is the foundation of experience. Your assumptions create the lens through which you experience life. Your imagination creates possibilities. Your self-concept determines what feels natural. Your inner conversations shape your expectations, and your state of being influences the actions you take. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means understanding that your relationship with reality begins within. The biggest realization from the experiment was this: the person had been waiting for external proof that they had changed. But the entire time, the evidence was already appearing internally. Confidence was appearing before success. Peace was appearing before circumstances improved. Self-belief was appearing before validation arrived. And that is something most people overlook. They think, when my life changes, I will become different. But transformation works the other way. When you become different, you begin experiencing life differently. After 30 days, the old identity started feeling unfamiliar. The old reactions felt different. The old fears felt less powerful. The old assumptions started losing control, not because they were fought, but because they were no longer being accepted. A belief only has power when you continue giving it attention. The moment you choose a new state, you begin creating a new direction. The law of assumption is often misunderstood. Some people think it means just imagine something and wait. But Neville's teaching was much deeper. It was about alignment. It was about becoming conscious of the state you occupy. Every day you are already assuming something. You are assuming something about yourself. You are assuming something about your future. You are assuming something about what is possible. The question is, are those assumptions creating the life you actually want? Most people try to change their circumstances without changing their identity. They change their environment, they change their habits, they change their plans, but they keep the same internal story, the same fears, the same limitations, the same beliefs, and eventually they return to the same patterns. Because the person creating the experience has remained unchanged. The final lesson from this 30-day experiment was not everything you want appears instantly. The deeper lesson was you have more influence over your experience than you've been taught to believe. You are not simply reacting to life. You are participating in the creation of your experience through the consciousness you carry. The way you see yourself matters. The thoughts you repeat matter. The assumptions you accept matter. Because before something becomes visible, it begins as an invisible idea. So instead of asking, why is my life like this? Ask, what state am I living from? Instead of asking, when will things change? Ask, who am I becoming? Instead of saying, I will believe it when I see it. Ask, can I see it within before it appears without? Because every transformation begins in the unseen. Your future is not created only by what happens tomorrow. It is being shaped by the identity you accept today, the version of yourself you repeatedly imagine, the conversations you repeatedly have, the emotions you repeatedly choose. All become part of the reality you move toward. Neville Goddard's message was never about escaping life. It was about understanding your relationship with life. You are not here to simply accept every circumstance. You are here to become aware of the power within you. Because the moment you stop seeing yourself as powerless, everything begins to change. If this message connected with you, subscribe to Neville Archive for more deep explorations of Neville Goddard's teachings, consciousness, imagination, and the law of assumption. Remember, Do not chase the reality you want. Become the person who naturally experiences it. Your imagination is not just a dream, it is the beginning of creation.